Great. We got white. Awesome. Let's hope for the best. So we're getting d6, which is the perk. So there's two ways we can play this. We can play this by trying to control the center, or by not doing that, and by playing d3. And I'm going to opt for d3. So f5 does not feel like a move. I'm very, very happy to take that, because it feels like there's going to be tactical problems with the bishop. And again, sometimes you have to opt for like not playing directly into an opening just because it's your opening, and play differently. So the move queen f3 does just cause problems for our opponent, I think, where they have to play bishop c8 or queen c8. Do I want to do that though? Maybe not. Is there another way to play? We can go for a regular King's Indian attack still. Yeah, why deviate? So I was thinking originally queen f3, but they have queen c8 at the very least, right? Defends the pawn, and also maybe bishop g4 is annoying, so let's just continue on with our merry way. That's the good thing about the King's Indian, is you can be a little like inflexible and just kind of play the same way each time and get away with it. So that's what we're doing. Yeah, g3, bishop g2, castles. And who does the open f-file favor? I think it favors white. Now that feels like a weird move, because now it feels like knight d4 is playable, or knight h4. Okay, I'm just going to play h4 just to cover the g5 square. I don't want to allow h4 for my opponent, because they're thinking of maybe a rook sacrifice, like an exchange sacrifice, that is, on h4. And I think still this h5, h4 thing does also favor me, just because I'm more developed than them. The center, I'm going to try to open it soon, and that doesn't look like it's going to end well. We'll have to see, though. So a5, yeah, they're not really playing in the center, and the problem with that is that, well, look at me. I've castled. My bishop on g2 is great. My knight on f3 is great. My rook on f1 is good. Obviously, queens are good, but generally queens are happy on their original squares, or just one square up. But I have a very natural way to develop. I don't want to develop this piece yet, in case they... I feel like my spidey senses are tingling where they might play bishop h6. So I just want to leave my bishop on c1 if they do that, just so I can take it. Now it feels a lot less likely. And I want to continue with my development. So knight d2 or knight c3? That's the question. King's Indian attack players generally play knight d2, but with the e-pawns gone, knight c3 doesn't feel so bad. Neither does d4, which is kind of funny. Like, we play d3, now we play d4. But the idea is to control more space and make e5 harder to play, right? Because if they could play right now e5, I think they might even be happy with that. So generally, you want to make sure your opponent's sad. So I want to play d4 and make my opponent sad here. And then I want to go c4 and then knight c3. The reason why I play d4 is because it's not even necessarily just to prevent e5. It's actually, where does my knight want to go? Okay, c3, but I don't want to play knight c3 without the pawn on c2. I want to play c4 and then knight c3. And the big difference is that, well, the pawn on c4 is better than the pawn on c2. It's controlling a lot more central space here, right? Look at that pawn. It's great. And this is kind of just like a Dutch, actually. This looks a lot like a Dutch, because they played f5. But it's a bad Dutch because we played e4, right? If you in the Dutch, generally, if you can play e4 and trade off these two pawns, you're very happy. And this is exactly what we did, so. Okay. Being a little annoying. I'm just going to play bishop g5. I don't want to move my rook off of f1 because f2 becomes a little tender. I'm looking at potential knight d5s. That's why I played this move. So I want to see if they develop their knight in a weird way like this. then I can look at a move like knight d5. I'm just trying to keep flexibility, develop all the pieces, make natural moves. If I want to bring a rook to e1, it's going to be the a rook. So I'm going to go queen d2 and then rook a to e1. And again, it looks weird that we're keeping the rook on f1, but I think it's actually more flexible like that because the rook on f1 does such a good job defending f2 because the f file is half open. So we should really be careful. Now knight d5 looks really tempting. Knight d5, if they go knight f6, we can take it, or we can just continue development, as mentioned before, with queen d2. When in doubt, develop. So that's what I'm doing. And then rook e1's coming, and then e7's attacked, and if they defend it, then I can just go knight d5 again and attack it again. And just continue with the attack. So if we could trade off one pair of minor pieces in this position, what would we do? The dream is to trade off this knight for this bishop. If we do that, they're just lost. And the reason why is because their dark squares are extremely weak with their opened king. So this is the problem with opening the position when the center isn't locked and things aren't closed down, is if the bishop goes bye-bye, even if we traded for our dark squared bishop, I think there's still significant problems for opponents to solve, just because as the position opens up, the king's safety becomes a lot more apparent. Like the imbalance of it, the fact that our king will be so much safer. So that's something I'm really aiming for here, is to somehow get an exchange of dark squared bishops, or even for dream scenario, knight for that bishop. Just because if we can keep our dark squared bishop and they have weak dark squares, then, well, this bishop would look like a monster. A monster. There's a lot to be proud of this position. This knight's not really too happy. This rook, it's not clear where it's going to go yet. Our rook is very clear. We're going to go rook a1. The rook on f1 is doing a good defensive job. And again, I don't really want to move that rook. Our bishop is pretty good. It can open at any moment to target b7. The knight on f3 could be improved a little bit. So I think we should take. Wait, why did I take? Their queen is hanging. Why did I do that? Thank you, Henry, for the follow. Okay, now let's take their queen. And guys, I just want to say one thing. Let's pretend that I didn't miss that. Okay, let's pretend that I'm good at chess. All right. Because I might cry myself to sleep tonight after that one. So knight d4 is just to attack this bishop. It's also to target b7, so it's a multi-purpose move. Now I can take f5, and this is good because now these pawns become a lot weaker. Queen g5 check looks like it picks up this pawn. b7 is hanging. I don't know if I'm going to take it yet. Let's just go queen g5 check. So like, yeah, there was a good mention in the chat here where sometimes when your opponents play moves like this, you don't expect it. So you just kind of like accept that it's a move. But remember, when you're playing your opponents, don't expect moves to always be moves. It's really important. So do I go check? Check looks like a good move. I also really like taking because it's just attacking their knight. So then their knight has to move. It's just a free pawn. Sometimes, like, if you're not sure about the kingside attack, we're up 8 points of material, right? We don't have to sacrifice, go crazy for attacks. Like the last game we had. We can just play it normally. And sometimes that's all we need to do. So I'm not trying to be too special here. This move, knight e7. The bishop's not trapped. If rook b8, then we have knight e7 to defend it. We have to worry about this move here. Rook d7. But I think we're okay. It's a knight e7 check. King g7. We could also go rook c1. I also like f4, which looks very strange, giving them this entire check. But I'm trying to get in some like rook e1 and e7. Maybe that's too much. Let's go rook c1. Ask them where they want to go. If they go knight d4, f4 is even better, because they do not want their knight there. They want their bishop there. So knight d4, we'll go f4. And knight e2 check, we'll even give up the exchange. I think I'm totally happy to do that. This pawn is hanging. If they take, then I can give a check here and then take back. Let's take the pawn. I love pawns so much. Also, we can go queen g6 check and then take on c2. This is even better. We should really just go for the maximum amount of material we can. That's the most instructive way to play the game. If they go rook g8, we can just give a check. Check. They have to block with their knight. And then we can play knight e7. And this sets up a little tricky tactic. So if they go bishop g7, which I'm really hoping they do, we have knight g6 checkmate. And if they don't do that, we'll knight g6 check, we'll win. Ooh. Ouch. Ooh, that's gotta hurt. So I'm curious how the game went. Let's ignore the one inaccuracy we made, because that was embarrassing. But okay. D3, F5. So again, generally when you see the perk defense, the most challenging way to play against it is by playing D4. And there's a knight C3 move here, right? So knight C3 is a very strong move. It defends the center, and you're just going to continue on with your normal development scheme. But D3 is an attempt to just continue our King's Indian attack idea. And generally, as we can see, the position's equal instead of like a slight advantage. But let's be honest here. How many times have we gotten slight advantages out of the opening and lost the game? I think it's more important that you understand the concepts within your opening, even if it's not the most challenging. And we have to be very specific what I mean by not the most challenging. Like this D3 is not the most challenging, but it's still a reasonable opening where you can pose problems to your opponent. However, a move like F3 is just incorrect. Why can't I play F3? Let's just say, okay, I don't know why I can't play it. Like if you play a move like F3, this is different because this is just straight up bad, right? There's difference between a slightly weaker alternative for a theoretical reason as opposed to a move that's actually just totally fine, like the move D3. So F5 does feel wrong. So bishop G5 was recommended. I was not looking at this, but I took it, and I was actually looking at Queen F3 here, and I'm happy I didn't do that. So one of the main recommendations is actually D4, which is played later. So I'm very happy with my opening here. G3. Oh, knight H4 is really strong. And knight D4. I should have seen this. The idea here is Queen H5 check is really annoying. So if they have to play like a little weird move. Maybe Bishop E6 might work. Bishop H7 is recommended. But then you see Queen H5 and King D7. And you start thinking like, I did not play this correctly. And that's the problem with moving your F-pawn too early in chess, is sometimes your king can just become extremely weak. I went for G3. I thought this was fine personally. H4, G6, Bishop G2, A5. Castles, yep. White has an advantage, which is unsurprising here. And Knight D4 is the top move. I was just looking for development for a position like this. So D4 I thought was totally fine. And yeah, looks like the advantage is still there. So that's good. C4 and Knight C3. And yeah, even though it feels like, yeah, maybe we could have played something a little bit more critically here, I feel very happy with what we did. The recommendation is Knight D2. And that's just to make sure that Bishop G4 doesn't annoy us, I think. And C3 as well. I was happy with C4 and Knight C3, personally. queen e2 or bishop g5. Again, we do have a slight edge, and I'm very happy about that. So not really too much to complain about. And yeah, here, let's just ignore that. Let's ignore that I missed that. Okay, thank you. Knight d4, c5, knight takes f5, of course, because this weakens their king. And if they play rook takes f5, which they should do to keep their pawn structure just a little bit more intact, we have bishop e4 or bishop takes b7 or even knight d5. Like, they're, even with the light squared bishop gone, their position gets so much weaker. And of course, they're down a queen, so that, you know, might not matter as much to those watching at this point, but I think that's still relevant. Knight b4, knight d5. Yeah, I was a little curious about this rook d7 move. And I was planning a3. It looks like that's totally fine. There's actually a funny move, bishop c8 here, with the idea of rook takes c8, queen takes f5, and then the knight on g4 hangs, as well as this piece. And you can't defend both because rook g7, then you take on c8. So that's kind of cool. Knight c2, rook c1, knight f6. And it's actually just a mate here if I played this, but I didn't because I'm a silly boy sometimes. King h8. Oh, whoops, I already missed it. Knight takes f5 is the fastest mate. King g8, queen g6 check, king h8, and queen g7. That's a nice checkmate. But I'm very happy with what I got in the game, which was a smothered mate here with knight g6. So again, sometimes you can try to just focus on development, even though you might miss some like tactical opportunities, like I clearly did here. But as long as you are, you know, still trying to make reasonable moves, like okay, missing knight d4 or knight h4 to me isn't the biggest crime, because sure, there was maybe faster chances to win, but I was very happy and comfortable with this type of position. So not going for maybe the most critical line with something like knight d4 because it's complicated, I think it's fine. But it's also important also to know, if you see a line like this, like knight d4, personally this didn't jump on my radar at all, but if you see a move like knight d4 or knight h4 earlier, then you do have to consider it. It's an obligation that you consider a move like knight h4, or like if it comes into your mind, then you at least try to calculate it a little bit, because you don't want to just avoid complications because it's complicated. You want to go into complications if you think it's correct. I was just going off the principle that if our opponents are playing weird moves in the opening, generally the best way to refute that is just to play normally, develop our pieces, and then any weird moves they make, like f5 or h6 and d6 here, well, this creates a lot of weaknesses for our opponent, and the weaknesses will start to show themselves later on in the game. And that ended up actually happening here in this position where everything's extremely uncomfortable for our opponents. So that's going to cover it for this game.